You're listening to the Digital Child Podcast, brought to you by the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child.
If you're a parent or a carer of young children, there's a chance you've felt the occasional or regular pang of guilt letting your children use tablets or other devices before bedtime. But how worried should we be about screen time and sleep? Does technology negatively impact children's sleep? And what can you as a parent do given the pervasiveness of technology in the modern world? I'm Sonia White, a Chief Investigator at the ARC Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child and the host for this Digital Child podcast episode. Today we're speaking with Dr. Janelle McKenzie, a research fellow in the centre, who completed her PhD on maternal and infant sleep and is now investigating the interplay between technology and sleep for primary school children. Welcome to the podcast, Janelle.
Thank you for having me, Sonia. It's great to be here.
So, sleep and screen time is definitely a contentious topic when you speak to any parent or carer. Now, I'm speaking today as a parent of two young children. They're under 5. I must admit, I spend a lot of time and energy thinking about my children's sleep or definitely maybe their lack of sleep. And digital device use in the home adds a different level of unknown and uncertainty. So, Janelle, your research in the centre examines the associations between children's digital technology use and their sleep. Can you tell us about what we know already based on research and what's been done in this area?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of research happening within this space. So sleep is considered one of those main key pillars of health. In the past, we'd often talked about diet and exercise, and now everyone's starting to realize how important sleep is for physical and mental health. And as childhood is such an important, vital developmental period, then we want to make sure that we're giving children the best opportunity to play and learn and grow and basically develop skills to bring them into healthy adulthood. So there is a growing body of research highlighting the negative physical health, mental health, and school performance impacts of poor sleep for children. So for children, the impacts of poor sleep typically come through with difficulties with their behavioral functioning, their social and emotional regulation, and their cognitive functioning. So I guess what this means in real life is, when you have poor sleep, just like adults, it can be really hard to control your emotions when you're in the playground and someone pushes in front of you. And it can be really hard for kids to concentrate at school when they just haven't slept well, just like most adults would find it hard to concentrate at work. So it's not surprising there is lots of literature coming out there highlighting these negative impacts of poor sleep for children.
I can absolutely spot some of the signals that my children haven't had enough sleep. I know it's coming, and I know it's coming in the afternoon, and I can spot some of those behaviors and as you say, change in functioning. But now, Janelle, something that you said in there was you said poor sleep. So what does poor sleep actually mean?
Well, poor sleep can come in a variety of different ways. So, I guess the first thing to think about is the Australian sleep recommendations, which suggest for preschoolers, they should get between 10 and 13 hours of sleep, even more for younger children. And for children aged 5 to 13 years, which is the area we typically look into, it suggests that children should get 9 to 11 hours of sleep each night. There are reports that the amount of sleep that kids are getting is actually declining over the decades. So, some of the suggestions for why this might be happening is that we have really busy lifestyles and sleep isn't being prioritized. There's also obviously the discussion around whether this increased use of digital technology in recent years is actually impacting children's sleep. So, when we talk about poor sleep, the guidelines are highlighting the amount of sleep the kids should get. So that's obviously a big factor that is looked into in the research. But poor sleep can also be disrupted sleep throughout the night. So people do commonly have awakenings during the night, but then they go back to sleep quite easily. And that's a really normal thing. But it's when kids are being disrupted and waking up and going in and then maybe disrupting their parents' sleep and keeping them awake for a while and before going back to sleep. There's also irregularity in sleep. So we want to try to go to sleep at quite regular times and try to wake up at quite regular times. And that's really good for children to do too. But sometimes the schedules of busy families can make this really irregular. And there is some new research coming out that maybe that's not impacting children particularly well if there's some irregularity in their sleep.
So can I just ask you something there, Janelle, because this is really interesting to me as far as thinking about sleep patterns or sleep schedules overall. It's not a problem to have 1 or 2 nights of irregular sleep. There may be reasons behind that. What you're talking about is something more consistent and long term.
Yes, exactly. So it's basically if you have a typical night where a child is going to bed and lights are out at 7:30 and that varies a little bit by, half an hour, that's fine. That is normal. It's really hard to be that strict.
Oh,
But it's more when, say, on a Monday, a child would go to sleep at 6 o'clock, and then on a Tuesday, they go to sleep at 9 o'clock, and then it really varies like that all of the time, and it's that kind of irregularity. But if you have one bad night of sleep, just like for adults, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, no, and look, that's reassuring because there is that, that feeling of parental guilt, and it's more an average over time is what I'm hearing, and rather than just one bad night or a couple of bad nights.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. It's fine. It's just that accumulation over time of not having that regularity. And the same thing with the reduced amount of sleep. You might worry that, you've gone away on holidays and everyone's had so much fun and the kids have gone to bed much later than normal. It's fine. You can come home, you can get back into your normal routine and things will be okay. It's not going to necessarily have these negative impacts that people are concerned about with their child's health.
So, Janelle, can I also ask another question? So how does sleep happen for, for adults, for children? Can you tell me a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So it's really interesting when you start to think about sleep because it's something that we all do, or it's something that we all try to do at least every night. But there are actually some important processes that occur in our bodies that allow us to fall asleep, but they can be interrupted by other things in our environment or by our behaviors. So the first thing is that we have this sleep drive or this sleep pressure. So basically, when we've been awake for a long time, our body tells us it needs to sleep. So the second thing, and you've probably heard of the term our circadian rhythm. So this is a basic fundamental physiological rhythm and it regulates our daily patterns of activity and rest. So a key component is that in the hours prior to bedtime, the hormone melatonin is released and it begins to rise. So this signals the start of the sleep-inducing process or that process within our body that tells us it's getting towards time to fall asleep. One of the key things that actually determines this release of melatonin is actually light. So the light in our lives and the light in our environment that we are exposed to actually helps to determine the time that melatonin is released. So bright light exposure in the evening can delay melatonin release and in turn delays the time in which our bodies can actually fall asleep. So that's another key point about how sleep occurs for us. And another thing that can also impact is a person's arousal levels. So if you think about when your mind is racing with lots of thoughts or you've just exercised and your heart rate is actually quite elevated, it can feel really difficult to fall asleep. All of these processes occur in children just like they occur in adults. But they're really important to consider when we think about how we're going to help our children get to sleep, because I'm not sure if yours are like mine, but sometimes I just try to procrastinate and do whatever they can to avoid getting into bed.
I think the saying is there's no one who has more to do than a toddler at bedtime.
I know,
So
it's amazing.
you mentioned that one of your suggestions for why children are experiencing poor sleep might be to do with technology use at bedtime. Can you tell me a bit more about that, please?
So I guess before we get into technology use at bedtime, it's probably really valuable to think about the amount of technology that's starting to creep into Australian homes. When we talk about digital technology, we're referring to things that really easily come to mind, like smartphones and tablets and TVs and game consoles. But now there are other technologies that are being integrated into homes, such as Bluetooth speakers that allow you to play music or podcasts from a smartphone, or lights that may be turned on or dimmed via a smartphone app, or maybe a device that's connected to the internet that will answer your questions or your children's questions. So within our house, we do have one of these devices, and I have overheard my children asking them various questions, such as, what is the most dangerous animal in the world? Or other brilliant things like that. I guess in terms of the literature that is out there about the research being done in this area, the main focus has been screen-based technology, such as televisions, in the past. And recently, tablets and smartphones are starting to creep into this research. But as it takes time to conduct research and publish journal articles, a lot of the newer technologies actually haven't been researched, or the research hasn't been published yet, actually. But that being said, the recent Growing Up Digital in Australia report indicates that 4 out of 5 Australian children have at least one digital device for their personal use and have access to, on average, 3 devices. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of how much technology is within Australian homes and being used by Australian children. Another recent child health poll identified that almost half of all children regularly use screen-based devices at bedtime. So this is also another really interesting insight. There's been a lot of research into adolescent literature because a lot of adolescents have access to smartphones these days and probably a bit more freedom around their use of devices. So there's still a little bit that needs to be done, I think, around really identifying how much children are using smart devices before bed. But there are suggestions that there's starting to be a bit more of this digital technology use at bedtime. And considering a lot of the research so far has been on screen-based devices, this is something that we are wanting to look into a bit more, with the concerns around the light that may be emitted from these devices.
Oh, no, look, and that's really interesting. And it's interesting hearing about, I know families who will do book reading using an audiobook, or using a digital device in different ways that are part of the bedtime routine. So it's about finding that routine that is transitioning to sleep in certain regards, but managing risk and benefit in others, and how you use that technology.
Exactly. Yes. I know. I was speaking to another person the other day, and she was saying that they were using this app to do bedtime stories with their child, who's 7, going to bed, and said she was playing it straight out of the iPad. And my question was, oh, was the screen on? Just thinking about the light, but actually it was turned off. So you don't actually have to have the screen on, and you can listen to the bedtime story. He was falling off to sleep, and then after he'd fallen asleep, she went in and took the iPad away. So it wasn't left in the room overnight, which is something that everyone suggests. Just so kids don't do that sneaky little use sometimes when the parents aren't around. But it was just a really interesting way to hear about how other people were approaching these bedtime routines.
And as you say, managing the situation that may not be ideal, or managing it as best you can. So, Janelle, you were talking about behaviours and environments and children's sleep, and things that could possibly affect children's sleep. What do we know about the behaviours and environments and how digital technology use is negatively impacting children's sleep?
Okay, so what I just mentioned before about the light is the first prediction. So it's that blue light that might be emitted from these screen-based devices could be actually delaying that melatonin release that we were talking about. That's really important to help our bodies feel like they can fall asleep. So, because as I mentioned before, that melatonin is released in the evening, if children are watching these screen based devices that do emit light, there is concerns that that is delaying the melatonin release, which means that they're not actually feeling tired enough to fall asleep until after their ideal bedtime or the bedtime that a parent is trying to enforce. And also, recent research has identified that children are highly susceptible to this effects of melatonin suppression from light. So within the literature, it is a bit of a concern and is something that's being looked into in more detail at the moment. So the second potential reason why poor sleep may be occurring for children because of digital technology use is due to this pre-sleep alertness. So as we mentioned before about your body wanting to feel kind of relaxed enough to fall asleep, the concern is that if children are using devices and watching shows or playing games that have these really alerting effects or these arousing effects, the concern is that they're not going to be tired enough to fall asleep, or their body's not going to be relaxed enough to fall asleep till quite a little while after they turn off the devices. And that's why the recommendations currently do state that kids shouldn't use any digital technology or screen-based digital technology within the hour before going to bed. And then the last prediction is that children are basically using digital technology when they should be sleeping. So we're calling this sleep displacement. So basically, children have a child that might ideally need 10 hours of sleep but has to get up at 7 a.m. to get ready for school. They're actually using digital technology within those 10 hours when they should actually be asleep. So this is the other concern and something that, researchers are looking into.
I must admit, I think of the transition in our household from dinner time to bedtime. It's actually a fairly busy time regardless. And we just end up into this period of bath time, books and bed and transition to sleep. And we find it mostly works. But sometimes things go awry and things don't always go to plan, but it is a busy period. And we just find that it's quicker if we turn off the device. But, I can't say that works 100% of the time.
I don't think that time of day works 100% of the time for anybody. But the benefit of having that routine is that even if it feels as though you're not giving the child a lot of time to kind of calm down, there's something about the actual routine and order of the events that preps them for it and their expectations. And so that's why there is a lot of literature out there for preschoolers and toddlers around those bedtime routines. And a lot of it is about, I think, fitting into what you're saying about, bath
Book bed.
book. Yes.
Now, Janelle, there's also, we can see, and you've mentioned a few examples, there's a fair bit of research into this area. What more are we trying to find out?
So, I guess a lot of the research out there, which has been great, has been some large cross sectional surveys. But there are limitations to all types of research. And the concern about survey based methodology within this space is that people might not accurately be able to report on their children's sleep. I'm not sure all parents can actually say exactly when their child went to sleep and exactly when their child woke up, let alone give an average over a week, because as we said, it can vary a little bit. So there's a bit of a concern there, and also around the number of items that are used to assess sleep. Some of these surveys, even though they've got amazing sample sizes, have measured sleep with one or two items, which doesn't seem to have the greatest accuracy. There's also concerns around whether people feel as though they might underreport the amount of digital technology that their children may be using. And I guess depending on how much supervision there is of children's digital technology use, they might not actually be able to report particularly accurately if they aren't really keeping a really close eye on the digital technology use. So there's a great need to really understand how digital technology is being integrated into children's lives as a whole, as well as in that pre-sleep period. And just find out, particularly in light of the new technology and those things that aren't necessarily screen-based, which is what's been typically researched, if there's other kind of interesting integrations of digital technology use that aren't all negative as well. I guess that's a lot of the research out there has tried to identify some of the negative elements to do with digital technology use, and that's where we have identified that poor sleep is coming out. But it'd also be really interesting to kind of find out how all these different types of digital technology are being utilized within family homes, getting some really interesting contextual information about maybe the same devices being used in really different ways in really different households. And yeah, that's kind of where we're going. So our research group within the centre is going to be looking at how sleep and technology actually fit into children's everyday lives within their home environment particularly, and just also try to see what behaviours and mechanisms about children's technology use could be negatively impacting children's sleep, but then what things could be positively impacting children's sleep as well. And it is this really important element to investigate light exposure from these devices, because there is an assumption that it is really negative, but a lot more information could really be collected about the light being emitted from these devices and a child's holistic light exposure over a whole day, and just see what it actually looks like, because there's so much that we still don't know that could be investigated.
I really like how you framed it around the whole child and considering the positive use of digital technology, and then mitigating any risks and understanding the whole context and family life. I think that sounds really positive from my perspective, because it's great to know that you're investigating this more, because I mean, I have a personal interest, but I know others have a wider interest as well, and we look forward to hearing about your findings in the future. But if I was to now ask you, based on what we know, what are some things that parents can do to promote good sleep practices?
So I think the first thing is to try to ensure that your child is in bed to achieve their recommended or desired amount of sleep. And look, the recommendations do have a bit of a span. So it is a bit of an individual thing where some children don't need as much sleep as other children the same age as them. So that's something for a parent to identify within the recommendations. What do you actually believe your child needs to function well, to be a nice family member, to be able to concentrate at school, and really figure out how long they should be in bed for, figure out what time they need to get up in the morning, and therefore what time they should be in bed the evening before. I think also when we're talking about that alertness before bed or that arousal, creating a relaxing environment, trying to calm down before going to bed is the ideal situation most of the time. I know some kids like to get out their sillies and do some things like that before they go to bed. But, just as a general rule throughout the pre-bedtime routine, it's more of a calm activity rather than an active activity. As we've mentioned, avoiding screen time during that hour before bed, or even longer if possible, if that's what fits into your routine. The earlier a device is turned off, the better it seems at the moment. Another key one that I alluded to earlier is keeping screens out of children's bedrooms. So we would like to think that children listen to us and follow all of the rules that parents would set out, but sometimes it's just easier to remove the temptation. So not having a device or something that a children could play with in their room overnight is one recommendation. And then, because technology is all around us and we're using it a lot, children get very excited by using technology. Maybe we could just identify other things that are technology that seem cool that could be integrated into a kid's bedtime routine. So maybe they could choose their bedtime routine music. So earlier in the day, you open up a music streaming service, choose a calming playlist, and then that gets played, from the device or speakers if you have them in your house to try to help that calming. Other little things like that. So just dimming lights, anything that seems like cool bedtime stuff with calming lighting, etc.
But I guess a key message that I'm hearing here, because these sound great from my perspective, but it's make it your own. Make it what works for you and your family. And these are guides that are some suggestions, and some will work better than others. And you make it work for you and your family and your situation.
Exactly. It really depends on the adults in the household, what works with their routine, what seems to work with children, because some things that might calm other children are not interested in. Some children might like to colour in and do that as a really calming activity, whereas other children would not be at all interested in colouring in. So definitely make it your own. Figure out what you've got in your household and what can help a child, calm down, stay away from too much light in the evening, and get to bed for the duration of time that they need to be in bed.
Oh, thank you, Janelle. I really appreciate your description of a toolkit, what I see as a toolkit of strategies that we can try. We can try in our family homes and see what works for us. So thank you for giving us those practical examples. So that is actually a wrap for today. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Janelle McKenzie. If folks who are listening have enjoyed this episode, you can find more on your favourite streaming device or at our website, digitalchild.org.au.